Hi, my name is Beck. This is How to Eat. Today on How to Eat, I'm going to give you some garden knowledge. I'm going to talk a little bit about pruning tomatoes and why it's so important. So tomatoes are a really cool plant to grow as a beginner gardener. They can get really tall. They can produce a lot of tomatoes, really rewarding for a first-time garden experience. But if you don't prune your tomatoes, they can get a little bit out of control and they can get pretty hard to actually harvest. So this tomato plant right behind me looks amazing, lots of foliage, but it's going to be pretty hard to actually get in there and prune my tomatoes. So you can see there's just a lot of overgrowth happening in this tomato plant, and if I'm trying to really get into my plant, it's going to be pretty hard to actually get in there. So one way to kind of tame your tomato plants is by pruning the suckers. So what does that mean, pruning the suckers? So if you come closer to my tomato plant, this one's going to be a little hard to see, obviously, because it's gotten a little out of control. But the base of the tomato plant always starts by growing one single stem. And if you follow that stem all the way up to the top, you'll see that it's just going to continue growing and growing and growing. If you go all the way to the top, you should see where the flowers are, and you'll see the next growth point where the next stem is going to keep growing out. If you just let your tomato plants grow wild, it's going to keep growing indefinitely unless you actually prune the sucker. So at each little growth node, it will grow one leaf and it will keep growing the stem out further. And in between the leaf and the next stem, a sucker will start to produce another stem. So if you let these stems keep growing, the plant will keep growing, but it's going to focus more on growing stem and leaf rather than producing tomatoes. So if you want your tomato plants to produce the best tomatoes and get less out of control, you'll want to find your stems and prune off all of the suckers, simply just pinching it at the base and prune off your suckers. So you can follow your whole plant all the way down to the vine, to the stem, and try to find as many suckers as possible to prune off. You'll know it's a sucker if there is more plant, more stem happening above it. So you can see I found another sucker right here. This one's a little bit smaller. We have our leaf, our stem continuing to grow above it. So I know that this is a sucker, which I can prune off by pinching it. Some of the suckers are pretty small, but some of the suckers can get really huge and produce a whole other plant. So I would have to guess that even this whole stem right here is just a full-on sucker. And I just found another sucker right here as well. So pinch it off. I prefer, when I grow my tomato plants, to prune the suckers when they're really small. It's going to be a lot easier to spot them, and it's going to help prevent your plant from getting to this state. It's also going to help your plant focus on making your tomatoes, and I think the fewer tomatoes you have growing on your plant, the better quality and flavor your tomatoes will actually have, because it's going to focus more energy on those tomatoes. So when I grow my tomato plants, I try to prune them very frequently, almost every time I'm out there. And I try to keep my plants growing to only 1, 2, or maybe 3 actual stems, and I get rid of all of the rest of the suckers to promote the best tomato growth. So we can go check out my tomato plant right now and see what's going on over there and prune a few more suckers. So let's go. So here we are at my tomato plants. I have not pruned them as thoroughly as I wanted to this summer, but I've still tried to come through and take off as many suckers as I can. I do, when I'm growing my cherry tomatoes, I like to let a few more stems grow, just because since they are smaller tomatoes, the plant can handle having quite a few different stems growing on it. But this is my cherry tomato plant. I can come through now and try to find another sucker, and here is another one, and I will get rid of it. Sometimes your suckers might have a few tomatoes growing on them, but it's a small sacrifice for the overall health of the plants. And let's see. Here's another one. Some of them are pretty small, like I said, but some of them can get pretty huge. So this is my cherry tomato plant. It's gotten pretty heavy with tomatoes, so the more that I prune it now, the better it will be to grow over time. So that is why you should prune your suckers, and I hope you learned something new. I can try it out. Let me know what you think, and I'll see you next time. Bye.